Welcome to my room. Take 5, 10. Today we're going to be talking about biopsychology. Now, biopsychology is kind of exactly what it sounds like. Biology and psychology. Both a biological and a psychological approach to explain human behavior, and with even a little bit of history thrown in, honestly. Pretty interesting stuff. So let's break it down a little bit. Alright, stay with me now. Here's biopsychology. This is the discipline we're talking about today. Biopsychology. Now, looking at some of the factors that influence biopsychology, we're going to break it down. Genetics. Genetics influences human behavior. Epigenetics influences human behavior. Evolution influences human behavior. And last but not least, experience, meaning what we're experiencing right now. Now, these four things really play into human behavior, and that's kind of the biopsychological approach. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is this. Evolution. Now, what happens at evolution, or evolution, however you want to say it, tomato, tomato, is genes are being naturally selected based on the current environment. So let's take the example of Darwin's finches, right? Now, Charles Darwin, the person who kind of came up with the idea, the concept of evolution, he studied these finches, right? And there was a drought. It happened over the course of 18 months, and only certain seeds that were bigger, those were the only thing that was edible in the place where this is taking place, because of in the Galapagos. Now, these finches, only the ones with the bigger beaks could survive, because they could eat the seeds. The birds with the smaller beaks, they couldn't fit the seeds in their beaks, so they died. So, because of that trait carried on and perpetuated. So the environment, it shaped the genetics, because, well, first of all of the other birds, they died off. Now, it's kind of like that throughout history. Another example is a long-necked animal. If there's a drought and only the higher branches, the higher trees, like there's nothing on the ground, it's only the trees, right, that are growing. The animals with the longer necks, those are the ones that will survive, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you could think of a lot of different examples yourself. But basically, the animals that are most suited to the environment, those are the ones that survive, and that's the process of natural selection. And so that is how our genetics are shaped too. Is our traits have been naturally selected based upon environmental factors over millions and millions of years. Now, in the case of Darwin's finches, evolution happened really quickly. There was a drought over the course of 18 months, and over the course of 18 months already, they saw that the birds' beaks were getting bigger, right? But our own genetics and the genetics of other animals, it's happened over millions of years based off of all of these different environmental situations that we've been in, right? And the other animals have been in. And so when we look at our own genetics, that's something to think about, right? Our genetic code is from our ancestors of our ancestors of our ancestors of our ancestors of our ancestors. Pretty crazy, right? Pretty crazy to think about. Just take a minute, let that all sink in, because that's wild. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about genetics. So, the interesting thing about genetics is our genetics are generally adaptive to the situation that we're in, right? I mean, that's evolution. That's our bodies trying our best to perpetuate our survival, because the goal of life in biology is to perpetuate life. Now, in some cases, our genes can be maladaptive. And one example of this is in the case of gene mutations. Another example is in the case of diabetes. Now, the interesting part here is that certain environmental factors can turn on the genetic code for diabetes. And once it's turned on, it can actually be passed on to subsequent generations. So that's just one kind of cool thing. your environment and your behavior, how you're treating your body, is not only affecting you, but it's affecting your genetics, and it might even affect your great grandchildren. So be careful, guys. But anyways, genetics, our environment influences our genetics a lot, and it's very complex. Genes interact with each other. Genes interact with our environment, and one thing to note here is that one gene does not cause one behavior. All right, it's a combination of genes interacting with each other, the environment, everything. Like, you can't just break it down of like, oh, if you have that gene, you're gonna act this way. If you have this gene, you're gonna have this way. In some cases, of course, if you have this gene, you're gonna have blue eyes. I mean, yes, but also it's a combination of the genes from the mother and the father, and what the combination, this and that. It's not simple. It's not black and white. So genetics, just one part of the biopsychological model and the bigger picture. So we've talked about evolution and genetics. Now we're going to talk about epigenetics. There's these operator cells. They determine the gene expression, right? And they are influenced by these DNA binding proteins. That's what regulates them. And those proteins are influenced by signals that the nervous system receives from the environment. Wow, that's a lot. So that to say, like, our bodies receive signals from our environment, and that's kind of what determines gene expression in a lot of cases. One of the last things we're going to talk about is experience, and how learning and our experience of the current situation, what we're currently going through, how that affects our genetics and how that affects our epigenetics and turns on certain genes. Now, there are also sensitive periods for us to learn certain things and for our nervous system to process that information and send it to our cells and turn on certain genes. And we can see this in the case of bird songs. If birds, they can hear a song from their parents, but they have to hear it within a certain sensitive period when they're young. And they hear that, and it turns on the genes that will allow them to sing the same song. Now, by this point, you're probably like, wow, this is a lot of information, and how do scientists even find all this out? Well, I'll tell you, really interesting human case studies and also animal studies, which are often a lot more ethical because we don't want to be cutting open human brains. That would be creepy. And also because animal brains are more simpler, scientists have an easier time determining patterns in a lot of cases. So as you've gathered by this point, biopsychology is very interesting, and it really takes a look at human history, human genetics, epigenetics, just everything, which is such a comprehensive approach, and how we should be approaching a lot of things in our life, probably. But if you're interested in biopsychology, I encourage you to learn more, and hopefully I learn more this semester. Bye.